The parry. It's fast, sometimes unpredictable, and it does a lot of damage. Some make builds focused on nothing but trying to get the parry, some have it as just another move to mix in, and some, like me, prefer to abuse the element of surprise by equipping or unequipping just at the right moment to get it off. Regardless of what strategy you use, a successful parry and riposte will often guarantee more burst damage than any true combo available to you. This burst damage could just be what you need to finally end a battle that would have otherwise taken forever. However, unfortunately for you, when it comes to attempting parries and avoiding parries, even with public knowledge and data, most people don't know what is really happening under the covers. And this obviously results in a lot of frustration as things happen that you wouldn't expect based off how they are believed by the general player base to work, such as dead angling. So, that's what I'm gonna try and explain today. To start, let's go over the basics that everybody can say 100% just from playing the game. A parry is a deflection of your opponent's attack, which puts them into a vulnerable state which you can follow up with a riposte. It happens when the parry move connects with a parryable attack at the right point. Various parry tools have differently sized windows they can parry attacks in. Now, I'm going to explain to you something that's very important. The parry check is one-sided and depends fully on what the person being parried sees on their game. What do I mean by this? Is this supposed to be shocking? Well, yeah. Basically any other hit except for backstabs is a one-sided check. The attacker simply checks if their weapon appears to be hitting the other, and if it is, it tells the other game over the network that it got a hit, no matter how distant the receiving player may be from the weapon on their screen. It works like this even in shooter games, unless they implement a lag compensation system. The person who fired the shot checks if their shot appeared to hit anyone, and if it did, it tells the server, or directly to the other player if the game is peer-to-peer like Dark Souls, that they hit the other player. And even if the other player on their own screen receives the hit after they made it behind cover, they will still be damaged. So you can see, even though there is a hitbox on this player when I make them appear to do an animation, it doesn't actually do anything because their game expects the other to do the actual hitting over the network. With parries, it's the other way around. It's the receiving game's end that needs to check if their weapon got deflected. This is why a very latent player always seems to get parried far after you deflect, but when you get parried by a latent player, they always appear to deflect as if they weren't latent. So no matter how latent someone is, as long as your animation ends up getting seen on their game, they can be parried. However, if somebody has a jittery or packet lossy connection, any measurement you take of their latency may very well not apply any amount of time after, and thus not even an AI could reliably get parries. Sometime I'll make a video or several videos explaining specifically how to make an educated guess on a player's latency based off several possible things when you are fighting them, and how you can adapt your parries, spacing, rolls, backstabs, etc. to that latency. The rest of the video will be dedicated to explaining the several checks required for a parry to go through. Just remember that all of these checks are performed in the game of the person who is being parried. Let's start with the one most people know about and pay attention to, the parry frames of your parry tool. This is just a period during the parry animation that a parry can happen. As you can see, a large spherical hitbox appears as long as these two event boxes are active. The first event is invoke attack behavior with the attack type parameter set to parry, and the second is called jump table with the ID try to invoke force parry mode. You don't need to know what exactly these both do yet, just know that they are both responsible for making a parry possible. Now, on to the check that nobody talks about, and what actually makes dead angling effective. The shocking reality of it is, it's not the angle that determines if you can get parried, but what sections of the attack animation you allow to hit them. For example, the legendary straight sword one-handed R1. Its parryable window is active during the first 2 frames of the attack's hitbox, which will last 4 frames. That means, as you can see here, that past a certain point in the swing animation, the weapon will not be parryable. So, it's a matter of time elapsed in the swing, not difference in player-to-player angle that saves you from the parry. From the attacks I've looked at, the parryable window is almost always 1. Active before or as the attack starts, 2. Ends before or midway throughout the attack, 3. Generally smaller on larger weapons like greatswords, curved greatswords, ultras, etc. 4. Larger on subsequent R1s, rolling attacks, and running attacks. 5. Very large on certain weapon arts, such as charge. And finally, 6. Repeating on attacks with several hits, such as the ones on the Farron Greatsword, but not every single swing of every parryable attack will have its own parry window. Notice how the window can be outside the attack window. This does mean you can parry some attacks before the hitbox appears, but the hitbox is still required for a lot of parries to work. Remember that for when we get to it. On some attacks you may have seen, there's only a single frame in which parries can land. Luckily, if your parry tool has a lot of parry frames, you have a lot of room for error as one of them are likely to catch it. You don't need to be frame perfect as long as you aren't using something like, well, a medium shield that you don't meet the requirements for, which only has a single parry frame. What effectively these windows do is not only create dead angles, but dead ranges. Ranges at which your weapon will be able to hit the person trying to parry you, but only at the times where it can't also be parried. This is the point where actually angling your character comes in. If your horizontal attack swings from the right to left, you can orient your player to the right and will only hit them likely far past the parryable window.
Well, if you do it on your to your right, that angle to your right. Yeah. And that like, just that's what you want to do with the curved sword. Sometimes you still get parried if you like dead angle like this. Yeah, so it's better to do it like this. We're always showing your slow side toward. Well, okay, yeah, you can't see on my screen. Never mind.
That's crazy. So, I've heard people make this supposition before that if you actually have to parry the hands to some extent, not just the weapon. So that means, like with split leaf or a spear or something, you could conceivably stand far enough away that you can hit somebody but not get parried.
Vertical and thrust attacks can take advantage of this as well. Since the parry window is usually limited to before or the beginning of the attack frames, you can simply space yourself so your attack only hits them at the very end with the very edge. So in other words, just the tip, but not too quickly. Remember what I'm doing here is against someone with parry frames on their parry tool 100% of the time. Dead angling and ranging can be great, but it's not necessary or helpful in all circumstances, especially since you lose the early hit and range. It should just be one of the options in your toolkit when dealing with a player that might attempt to parry you. For example, if someone, like me, has the ability to hard swap out of nowhere a parry shield into their main hand, you can still be super safe without dead angling by only hitting them at points where they can't swap, parry, or get to parry frames fast enough, such as a whiffed R1, roll, etc. I'll save more rounded advice like this for another video. I just wanted to throw this in there so people don't take what I explain here as the one-all key to avoiding parries or achieving parries. You still need to learn it by playing the game for real. Now, it's time to finally move on to the 2 possible ways parry can finally go through after both these previously stated checks have been passed. Number 1. The force parry. Why do I call it the force parry? Well, because it's caused by the first event I mentioned in the first check. Try force parry mode. And because it kinda acts like a force field. If the attacking player is in parryable frames, is hitting you with their hitbox, and the person parrying is in parry frames, it will straight up parry them no matter what. This is what allows some attacks to be parried when they hit you from behind and others, not so much. Now, let's move on to the second parry, which works quite differently. Number 2, the hand slap parry. So, remember that spherical hitbox I mentioned earlier? It actually is only related to this type of parrying. Luckily, this and the previous parry type in all parry animations I could find are active during the same exact frames as each other. How this one works is still quite mysterious to me. I had spent a whole day trying to find a dummy poly ID, on the attacker that I assume the game checked for inside this sphere. I couldn't find an exact dummy poly, however, it had a bit of variance between these two. What it most likely actually checks is collision with the hitbox for the hand, which I have no idea how to display. But pretty reliably without the force parry event, this parry would only go off with my hand inside the sphere. Oh yeah, and there's actually another check inside this check. Your angle actually matters in this one. First, you need to know the position of the spear is based on not the person's parrying tool, but instead their root position. So it's going to be aligned with the direction their pelvis is facing generally. You can't exactly see it, but the spear has a direction. If the person being parried is facing less than 53 degrees away from this direction, they will get parried. Because of this kind of parry won't work backwards, and for attacks without an active hitbox during their parry frames, you can actually dead angle them for real. What you can also do is not just dead angling, but hitting with your attacks in such a way that they rather avoid the spherical hitbox altogether. Or, you simply don't hit it with your hand. Remember that even if you do this, if your attack can be subject to the force parry, as stated like earlier, you may still very well be parried. Earlier in the video, I left an asterisk on time in the animation, not player angle, is what saves you from the parry. In most cases, this is what will save you. The force parry is much more frequent in my experience than the hand slap parry, as most parries are done to weapons with large parry windows that overlap with attack frames, in my experience. However, player angle is indeed directly responsible in the case of hand slap parries. Okay, so to recap, a parry may only land if it occurs during the parry frames of a parry tool's parry animation, and during the parryable frames of an attack animation. After these two conditions are met, a parry will only happen in one of these two scenarios that have to happen in the same time as these previously stated conditions. 1. A hitbox from the attack animation is also in contact with the player who is parrying. 2. If the attacker's swinging hand has his hitbox inside this sphere that appears during parry frames, and the attacker is looking less than 53 degrees away from the parrying player. If you had any trouble understanding the contents of this video, I recommend you go back and try to understand it further and pause when you need to. You can also leave a comment asking for clarification on something you can't wrap your head around, and I'll try and reply with a helpful answer. The program I used to examine the game's frame data is called DS Animation Studio, and it was made by the amazing Meow artists. I'll provide a link for their Twitter and Patreon where you can download the program for the generous price of $0. A lot of the stuff I and other modders do would not at all be possible without the amazing free software like this, so I recommend supporting Meow Artists' work if you can. I want to also thank I Am Amish and Sleep M for helping me with some of the tests in this video. They have been at it making Dark Souls 3 PvP guide and tech videos way longer than I have, so I recommend you check them out if you want more content similar to this. If this is your first time watching my channel, I recommend you check out my other deep dive videos on roll latency and poise. Along with that, you may like some of my other DS3 content like my modded boss fights, and interactive content like my build copy invasions. If you already have, why are you still not subscribed? You can't expect YouTube to do all the work recommending me to you by chance. But seriously, I highly appreciate the support the past few weeks. My video on poise was my first to start getting recommended this much, and I'm glad a lot of people, but not all, were able to finally get a good grasp on how this mechanic actually works. To close off, one of you messaged asking me if there was a way to further support my work. I didn't really have such a thing except for stream donations, so I went ahead and made a Patreon. If you want to support me a bit financially, you can find it in the description. Thanks for watching, and hopefully one day you'll actually get that parry.